Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, it truly is a pleasure to be here with Julie today. I got to connect with her earlier this morning, and she's truly amazing, super insightful. We only chatted for about 20 minutes, and I felt like I got so much from the conversation. So I'm very excited and thrilled to be able to moderate the session today and for you to be able to learn from her and hear her perspective. So Julie, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself, tell those listening in about your role and your journey in becoming a leader in the marketing space and at Anheuser-Busch?
Sure. Thank you, Angela, for your time. I know it's hard to do this, first thing after a holiday weekend. So I'm Julie Yufe. I lead our expansion markets or our growth markets in Europe for ABInBev, or Anheuser-Busch, as you might know it in the US. I've been in the marketing CPG world for quite a while. After grad school, I started at Mars first. Then I spent the bulk of my growing years, so to speak, at Unilever, where I worked across a variety of iconic brands from Lipton, appealing to everyone from grandmothers to teenage boys, to then the global Vaseline team. So again, that took me to various places around the world to understand the skincare needs of consumers in all age groups. And then lastly, to US hair care business, where I worked on everything from beauty products to anti-dandruff for men. And then came to ABInBev, and I've had the immense pleasure and privilege of being part of consumers' very important, meaningful moments in their lives, from great celebrations to historic sporting events. And I would say the common theme for me in these roles is always culture. I studied art history as an undergrad, and I'm just extremely passionate about culture. I consume a lot of mass culture. I think most people today spend more time with the products of brands than they do, with great works of art or literature, unfortunately. And so this has, but in the traditional sense, and so this has taken over as, I would say, the great art of our time. I think everyone can remember an ad campaign they grew up with, or a sporting experience that they've had that has been truly memorable. And for me, this is my passion. And I think this is what makes what we do so rewarding every day.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can all remember some of those. That's why I got into, the marketing and advertising world. Is just, I want to be a part of, defining some of those cultural moments and getting to have a voice in this space. So I resonate with that a lot, and I'm sure a lot of others on the line do as well. You've had like a really amazing career. You've jumped across industries and things like that, in terms of going from like beauty to the ALK space. As you think back, like, if you could give advice to a younger woman starting out in her career, or even yourself, thinking back to the early days in your career, like what do you feel like you wish you would have known that today?
There's so much. I guess that if I were to leave one thing, I would say that the world needs you. And it needs you yourself, not some version of you that has changed or morphed based on what you think expectations should be. I think the last year, and some of the previous speakers touched on this too, the last few years, we've seen how we've never had more need for creative problem solving, right? Between wars and pandemics and global climate crisis. And it's been proven time and time again that the best way to solve for the unknown is with creativity. And the greatest way to channel creativity is through diverse ideas and diverse personalities and perspectives. And so for me, what I would say is be yourself. You are needed. Every individual out here is needed as themselves. And if you have the immense privilege, as many of us do, to sit at the table, then, occupy that space, give your point of view, give your perspective. It is needed. It will add value. Even if at times you're doubting that, right? You're there for a reason. And the more we do that ourselves, the more we make space for others, the better off we are able to solve some of these really big, hairy challenges that we're all facing, whether it's, in our individual brands or as, people in the world trying to solve some of society's biggest problems.
I love that. I talk to my team a lot about how every problem or every situation is a beach ball, and you might be looking at the beach ball from a different perspective than I'm looking at the beach ball. And that's really important because if I can't see the other side of the beach ball, I don't know the full scope of the problem or the situation we're trying to solve. So I love that. And I think that, making room for other people's voices to be heard as well is, really important. I think about that on my team. If I see like a quiet voice in the room, like how am I encouraging them to, to speak up, to share their ideas, to feel comfortable in doing so. That's something that, definitely I remember early in my career being like, I can't believe I'm being invited to this table. Like I need to listen more than I talk. And sometimes there's, that there's a beauty in being a little closer to in the weeds or the day-to-day that's really important that I definitely cherish with some of my team members who are a bit earlier on in their careers.
I think it's an interesting point you make as well about the listening, because obviously we're in different stages, but there's always an opportunity to learn and to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
I learned that when I switched from, the marketing area, which I know quite well, or I feel like I know quite well, into a broader scope and was learning all new languages, right? I'm still learning. So there's definitely, of course, room to listen, but sometimes that unique perspective or that different perspective or that naive perspective is what's needed. And, we think about the most creative people in the world, they're always kids, because they don't have, some of the preconceived notions that, oh, that's not going to work, or we tried that already. And, so they're looking at the problem fresh in a way. And so that can be very, very helpful. So I'm not saying don't listen, but, there's a reason you're there, right? Everyone who's out here. And so you should bring that self to the table, because we don't stand a chance if you don't.
Agreed. Yes. I think about that with my kids. They'll ask questions. Sometimes I'm like, why don't we do it this way? And I'm like, that's a great question. I don't know why we don't do it that way. Let's dig deeper there. And yeah, there's a lot of power in just being curious. And I remember a mentor telling me, they're like, if you have a question, someone else in the room has a question, that same question. So be that voice and bring that clarity. Alternatively, I think, we just chatted a lot about, being newer in your career and, finding that jumping off point. When you think of your peers, what advice do you wish you could give to them? Or what's something that you wish you could say, hey, like, don't worry about this, or let's focus more on that. I feel like a lot of times we don't get to give that peer-to-peer like feedback. But for women who are a bit more established in their career, what advice would you give to them?
So I would stick with it back to the first one, definitely. Still, yeah. Right? That applies it no matter where you are in your career. And by the way, people are intimidated at all stages in their career. So, it's not like you're only intimidated at the beginning, and then yes, the problems get bigger, right? The challenges get bigger. But I would also add that, I genuinely appreciate when people try something new, even if it's not successful, or they stretch themselves in a way, even if it's not successful. I've learned, it sounds a little bit like a cliche, but I've learned a lot from when I have stretched myself into uncomfortable positions, and especially when they're not successful, because you start to see people's true colors. You start to learn about yourself. And, once you've kind of overcome a challenge, you realize, hey, if I could do that, I could do whatever's next. Take me to the next hill, the next problem, the next challenge. So I would tell my peers, don't be afraid to try something and fail. And, you'll learn a lot about yourself along the way. And by the way, you can never take away your past successes. So even if you've had like a tremendous record of success, and I know she's top of mind for everyone. We think about Serena Williams, in the headlines this week. Even with past successes and failures, right? Your successes never go away. So, there's only good that can come from stretching yourselves and trying to find a way to push yourself further than where you've been before.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot, it also sounds cliche, but like get comfortable being uncomfortable, because when you're uncomfortable, that's how you grow. I think the biggest growth in my personal life and my career, whatever, it's always come from situations where I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm a bit over my head in this, or I'm a bit scared. And it's normal to like have those feelings, but to be able to, jump in and like you said, learn and fail. That is also going to help building blocks to make you more successful moving forward. I can think of multiple situations where I failed and I'm like, oh, but now I know that roadblock exists, or I have all of the I wish I would have known that I can apply to future endeavors. So I really love that. I know we talked a bit this morning, about like as moms, it really takes a village, but I think that also holds true in your career. It really takes a village of connections and mentors and networking, and we've heard from a lot of other speakers about that as well, and how that's been really integral in helping their career flourish. I've been on the receiving end of it so many times, even in the most informal of ways, like our conversation earlier this morning on my way back from the gym. But how do you like pay it? How do you feel like you pay it forward and help with other women in marketing? Do you feel like it's something that is really formalized? Do you feel like it's more casual, in terms of how you're thinking about building those stepping stones for other women?
Sure. I will say this. If we build ways to make people's lives more flexible is not the right word, but if we make it easier for people to balance the many dimensions of their lives at work, I think that works for people irrespective of gender, irrespective of if they're a parent, irrespective of anything, right? Because everyone is leading multifaceted lives. You may have an older person to care for. You might have a sick partner. You might just be a single person trying to forge your way out there in the dating scene, whatever it may be, right? We only make things better when we help our teams to better, succeed in the workplace while also succeeding in their personal lives. And so I think it's something that cuts across the board. I think I feel it very clearly. And there's a very, I felt that moment really when I came back to work after having my child, and how I had to set the boundaries and figure out how I was going to juggle and manage my calendar. But what, there's a saying that I like, which is that if you want something done fast, give it to a busy person. And I think it's about prioritization and helping my team, helping individuals across the board, helping myself to figure out what is most important, what's going to move the needle, how to cut away the unnecessary, churn that happens, as we know, in every organization or every business, and focus on what's really material. And of course, that doesn't erase the feeling of, that you're compromising it as a mom, or that everything is flying all at once. I was on the phone with a colleague of mine who, is a very senior established person, and her spouse was away, and she was trying to figure out first day of school, how to juggle everything. And we could have a very serious conversation, or we could have one about, how you make boiled eggs as fast as possible to get the kids out the door. But everyone's going through it. And so I think if we as leaders try and find a way to help our teams prioritize and to help remove obstacles, that will be better for all. And the last point I'll make on this is that I am very clear about the hours of the day when I'm, okay, at this moment, I have to go take care of my child. I will be offline. You can come find me after this time or here. And my team knows what those are. And I think it's very important, because I also think it sets a standard that this is acceptable, that you can, turn off the WhatsApp for an hour and it will be okay. And I think it helps them as well as they model, the behaviors they want to have about the balance they want to create.
Yeah, I know we talked a bit about that earlier. I said, between the hours of 5:30 and 8:30, like bedtime, those are like magical hours for my children, and ones that there are few and far between things that I will allow to disrupt those hours. And I think making that space for your team too. I have team members who don't, like you said, don't have families, don't have kids, who are single, and they're like, oh, well, I can get on, I'm not really doing anything. And I'm like, but you need to recharge. Like, you need to make time for you. Like, this is something that can wait till tomorrow. Like, don't feel like you need to jump in and do this today. And even, being respectful of, we chatted this morning. I get up at an ungodly hour because I find a lot of peace in that my children and no one are up yet. But, I use tools and things like scheduled sends, so that my team's not feeling like, oh, I'm like just up and I need to be responding to her email at 5 a.m. It's you don't. That's what works for me, and I want to. And I think it's important for us all to be empathetic leaders and creating space for people to do what works for them as well.
In fact, so we've had some things in our team like called work contracts, where it's just a way to help, catalyze a conversation with your manager about how you best like to work and how, what are the best ways to reach you, communicate with you, when, can you be accessed, et cetera. Some people are happy, like me, to WhatsApp all day long. Others, not so much. I think the previous speaker two speakers ago talked about when she removed her company email and Slack from her cell phone, which I thought was very interesting. Yeah. I could not do that, but I'm sure there are many people out there. And so I think it's very important to set, what works best for you, and to kind of create the pattern and the conversation with your team to make sure that people can prioritize what they need for them. That way they'll be able to bring more to the table when they are working.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I think you make a great point about creating that space and talking to people about like, how do you like to be communicated with? I think we do a lot of that in terms of like, how do you like to receive praise? How do you like to receive, constructive feedback? But even just from a communication standpoint, I know I'm someone who my email inbox is a disaster, and that is like not the best way to get a hold of me. I'd rather, WhatsApp or Slack all day long, and I'm much quicker there. So I think like being able to build those connection points of like where people really succeed is important. So in terms of, I know Anheuser-Busch and ABInBev shows up in a lot of ways in terms of starting the conversation, and bringing not only women, but other diverse groups of individuals together through various programs. What are some of the ones that you're most proud of that you guys have really put forth, and what impact do you feel like it's making?
Sure. So we obviously show up in a lot of sporting events, I would say. We, have a lot of teams, a lot of leagues all around the globe. This is, Brand Innovators International. So I have to talk about football, which is soccer to the Americans around. And, we have done a very strong job, I think, of one, making sure that there is equity, not just in front and behind the camera and through the entire value chain of our marketing. But also we've done specific initiatives, I think, that have helped accelerate the conversation when it comes to equity, help with visibility, which has been part of the virtuous cycle of challenge for women's professional sports. Because when there's no visibility, there's no advertising dollars, and there's no advertising dollars, and it goes on and on. So we've tried different efforts around the globe. And what I'm proud of is, one, the consistency with which these are going, the impact that they have. And it's not just on the conversation, but on the brands themselves. So what started, in Europe, for example, in 2019, we were the first to put the women's senior team of England on the packaging, right? To celebrate, their bid for the Women's World Cup. We highlighted them, we got the nation to rally behind them. Likewise, our team in Argentina actually used advertising dollars and bought primetime space to rebroadcast a women's professional football match that otherwise would be booted in favor of other things, because it wasn't a priority. But of course, this is what brings visibility. It's putting your money where your mouth is and actually, walking the talk. Likewise, we've done efforts such as in Brazil with our Guarana brand, where we use the can actually as media, and basically encouraged 100 other brands like Puma, brands like Burger King, big brands, to basically help support women's soccer as well, with everything from funding uniforms to helping fund leagues and teams. And one that's particularly tremendous in the US is Michelob Ultra's $100 million commitment to support women's sports. This comes on top of, efforts from Bush to support women's NASCAR drivers, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's a lot of activity that we're doing, but the overall effort to make sure there is visibility, there is proper representation, and that there is ongoing financial support that to bring these sports the visibility they need and to ensure their longevity, I think is something I'm very, very proud of. And by the way, I don't think would happen if we didn't have, such smart, challenging, talented people in our teams willing to push the conversation, willing to push the envelope with their creativity and diverse perspectives.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, having those diverse perspectives is, really incredible. And I know we chatted even about, there's a lot of opinions on Gen X and their diverse perspectives. And we chatted a bit about how, they are really helping us like open the doors towards more of those diversity and inclusion and having those hard conversations. And, from a work-life balance, really bringing that, like, these are my priorities and I have to bring that forward. So yes, I think like as women too, it's great that we have more voices in the room and advocates for some of these great ideas and pushing those creative boundaries and suggesting something that maybe, a decade ago would have been a really unpopular opinion and would have gotten shut down, but having that openness as leaders, but also that creativity and pushing those boundaries is really incredible and allows us to do some really cool things in this space.
Well, and I also think, again, it helps challenge what it takes the brands to new and more inclusive places, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just good for humanity. It's, good for the business. And these are not niche anymore, right? We are no longer talking about women's sport as niche. And I think it's very important that, so it's not as though these ideas are small, right? Or, mm-hmm. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. These are big ideas. And I think the fact that we can use our very authentic presence in these sports where we've participated for a very long time helps. Likewise, right, I think this is all part of more human-centric and purpose-driven marketing, which I think we can expect to see more of, not just from us, but across the board. We saw a lot in Cannes, and I think that only helps push marketers to be more inclusive. It pushes the creativity, which I personally like, and it means better business results. So I think it's something we should expect more, and I'm very grateful for those generations that are teaching us this as well.
Yes, me too. So you mentioned a bit about, diversity and inclusion and more purpose-driven marketing as some key trends that you expect to see more of in the space. Any other trends on the horizon in the near term? I know as marketers, we always feel like there's the speed and volume of trends hits at a different pace than it used to. But what key trends do you see on the horizon that you feel like women in marketing or just marketers in general should really keep their eye on and start to plan for over the next few months?
Again, I go back to the first point you're making on inclusion, right? I think inclusion needs to be deeply embedded in everything we do, not just, as a human resources issue when you want to attract talent, but out into the world. We've all seen the evolution of the consumer through the pandemic and thereafter, and it's time to really start representing our audiences the right way. I would say, I think that we've seen some tremendous work in this space over the last couple of years, and the conversation in the last month or so, I think, has even advanced it further. So if I were to give shout outs for who I think are doing things well, the Unilever brand Dove, I think, has recently brought to light the issue on ageism in the workplace with the Dove brand and showcasing women with gray hair, and that's something to be proud of, not something to shy away from. Likewise, on the sport inclusion, there is some great work in Australia that I came across from, I'm trying to remember, Bundaberg Rum, where they basically made the rugby bracket, both the men's teams and the women's teams. So now you could pick your players from across. And I think that does a tremendous job of advancing the narrative. And again, from a creative standpoint, these are just great pieces of work to get brands seen, heard. Here I am in Belgium talking about these brands. So I think there's the bar has been raised, if you will, and inclusion is helping marketers to do that. Likewise, I think we can expect to see more representation in top roles in marketing, or I would hope we see that. to reflect the changes that we want in the world, to reflect the tremendous successes of different individuals in their marketing careers. And I think this all comes down to brands recognizing the need to be much more purpose driven and human centric, right? Really appealing to all of their consumers, not just small constituencies. And some tremendously rewarded work that I think represents this best is what MasterCard has been doing for the last few years, where it was enabling folks to change their name on the card when they weren't able to do so legally, to they launched Braille cards. So I think there are many conversations still to be had, and I'm really excited by seeing all these brands out in the world doing that and advancing the conversations in such a badly needed way.
I completely agree. I think there's, so obviously so much room for us to grow and to learn. And, half the battle is starting the conversation. I tell my team, I'm like, hey, if we can talk about it, we can fix it. And it might take longer than that first conversation, obviously, to fix it. But just starting those conversations brings, I think, so much power and so much momentum to the issue at hand. So I can think of some really great campaigns. Even, I have a dear friend who has been in a wheelchair her whole life, and there were never adaptable costumes, that thinking of, the upcoming Halloween season. And now, like, that's very mainstream, and you can pick one up at almost any store near you, and on many, websites. And I think that, really bringing that, diversity of inclusion and to life is, definitely at the forefront. If we had a crystal ball, and I love your crystal ball of predictions, Julie, for what we can expect in marketing, for sure.
Well, I think, and this actually brings to a very interesting point. So if I go back to the first point where we started about, the world needs you, right? And all of your diverse perspectives and diverse points of view and experiences, right? If you don't bring, if kind of we stick to the norm and of perspective that we've had all along, there will be no change, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to foster that in our teams. And particularly as I think about, previous speakers talked a little bit about Web3 and the metaverse, and how we build inclusive communities there. In a way, this is construction ground, right? So mm-hmm. It's not established, it's not set yet. And there's probably ample room to create the right conditions, the right environment, the right experiences for consumers that are inclusive, that are safe, that are the world we want to inhabit. Because we're starting from scratch. And so I would definitely encourage anyone who's working in those spaces to reflect on that, to think about how they can do that, what points of view they need to bring in, what outside experts that they don't already have, because, we're in a moment where we can start it out right instead of having to kind of rectify the past as we do so often.
I completely agree. And I think that that's a good point in terms of, I've spent most of my career in the digital space. And when I think about, like, why do people flock to digital? Sometimes it's an escape, or they're looking for a connection for something that they can't find in their physical space. So maybe it's, I'm not feeling, physically connected to my neighbors or people in my community, but I can get online and I can find someone who's like me or who has similar ideals and things like that. And I think really at the heart of it, that power of connection and thinking about that as we build, into things like the metaverse is really critical and important to, as you said, making people feel included, making them feel safe too. There's obviously, you could probably talk all day on, the safety of digital, and there's a lot we can learn from what's already out there to help inform our future, for sure.
Indeed.
Well, Julie, it was such a pleasure to chat here with you today. I really appreciate all of your time and insight. I've learned so much from you in the short time I've gotten to get to know you, and really just appreciate you taking the time to be here with all of us today. Any final words or insights that you want to leave the group with?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate how you figured out the balance of prepping and still having time to enjoy the long weekend. And I would say again, please bring yourselves every day. We need it. The world needs to be challenged. People need to be challenged. Ideas need to be stretched. And that only comes with real inclusion, real representation, and collaboration. And so I hope we can build the world we want to inhabit, or we try to inhabit every day, at least in our teams, so that we can continue to push the envelope and create amazing experiences for consumers and for our communities.
Yes, me too. It sounds like a wonderful world to live in, and I think the more we can all push forward in that that sometimes fight for it, but it really will make, as marketers we do have that opportunity to make the world a better place, or at least make our teams a better place. So thank you so much, Julie, and thank you everyone for listening in. Really appreciate the time, and all of your amazing advice.
Thank you for having me.